Eyes. You're about to walk into a room that changed human history. The year is 33 AD. The place, a borrowed upper room somewhere in the old city of Jerusalem. The night, Thursday, the 14th of Nisan, Passover Eve. Outside, the city is bursting. 250,000 pilgrims crammed into streets built for 40,000. The smoke of sacrificial lambs rises from the Temple Mount like a wall. The noise is deafening. But inside this room, 13 men recline around a low table. Oil lamps flicker against plastered walls. The air smells of roasting lamb, bitter herbs, and something none of them can name yet. An ending. Before the night is over, one of them will betray him. One will deny him 3 times. The rest will scatter like sheep. And the man at the center of the table will be dead before sunrise on Friday. But first, they eat. And almost nothing about that meal looked like what you've been taught. Forget Da Vinci. Forget the long rectangular table. Forget the wooden chairs, the fluffy bread rolls, the wine glasses, the forks. Because nearly everything in that painting is historically wrong. So what was actually on that table? What did the room look like? What did Jesus do in those final hours that no one talks about? Let's investigate. Before we step inside, let me show you what we know. 1st century Jerusalem upper rooms have been excavated. Wealthy homes in the upper city, the area most scholars place the Last Supper, had 2nd-story rooms accessed by exterior stone staircases. Plastered walls, flat ceilings with wooden beams, stone floors, no windows on the street side. Privacy was the point. Mark's gospel tells us Jesus sent 2 disciples ahead with specific instructions. Follow a man carrying a water jar, unusual since that was women's work, and he'll lead you to a house. Tell the owner. The teacher asks, "Where is my guest room where I may eat the Passover with my disciples?" The owner showed them a large upper room, furnished and ready. Furnished meant cushions arranged on the floor, a low table, possibly U-shaped, what the Romans called a triclinium. Oil lamps already burning, water jars for ritual hand washing. The room was prepared for a formal Passover meal. 13 men would fill it almost completely. Close quarters, warm from the lamps and the bodies, intimate in a way that modern church communion will never be. Now let's step inside and pay attention to everything. Because in this room, every detail is the message. The first thing you notice is the posture. They're not sitting, they're reclining. Lying on their left sides, propped on their left elbows, right hands free to reach for food. Feet extending behind them, away from the table. This was standard practice for formal Jewish meals, adopted from Greco-Roman custom. And at Passover, it was required. You reclined because you were free. Slaves ate standing, free people lay down. This explains moments in the Gospels that seem strange if you picture chairs. The woman who anointed Jesus' feet with perfume during a meal, she wasn't crawling under a table. She was standing behind him where his feet naturally extended. The disciple John leaning back against Jesus' chest to whisper a question. That wasn't mystical. It was geometry. If John reclined to Jesus' right and slightly forward, leaning back would naturally bring his head against Jesus' chest. They were that close. Close enough to share breath. Now look at the table. Forget individual plates. Forget silverware. At the center, shared bowls. Everyone eats from the same dishes, dipping bread with their hands. There are no forks, no knives at the table. The only utensil is your fingers and a piece of bread. And the bread itself looks nothing like what you'd expect. No tall loaf, no golden crust. This is Passover. The bread is unleavened. matzah. Flat, pale, brittle. It cracks when you break it, doesn't tear softly like regular bread. It's the bread of haste, what their ancestors baked when they fled Egypt with no time for dough to rise. You never cut this bread, ever. Cutting bread was considered violent, an attack on the symbol of life itself. You break it, you tear it, you hand the pieces to the people around you. Breaking bread wasn't a metaphor. It was how every meal began. Beside the bread, roasted lamb. The Passover lamb, slaughtered that afternoon at the temple, its bones unbroken as the law required. The smell fills the entire room, rich, fatty, smoky. Bitter herbs, raw horseradish or wild lettuce, sharp enough to make your eyes water. You dip them in a bowl of salt water, the tears of slavery, remembered at every Passover for 1,000 years. And then, charosset, a thick brown paste of crushed dates, figs, nuts, wine, and cinnamon. It looks like mortar. That's the point. It represents the bricks the Israelites made as slaves in Egypt. But it tastes extraordinary. Sweet, complex, layered. This was likely the dish, the shared bowl, into which Jesus dipped the bread he handed to Judas. 4 cups of wine, spaced throughout the meal. Red dark, always mixed with water. 2 or 3 parts water to 1 part wine. Drinking wine undiluted was considered barbaric. The cups were simple fired clay, not crystal, not silver. Cheap, breakable, ordinary. And possibly a pot of warm lentil or bean stew. Thick, filling, common at any first-century Jewish table. Scholars debate whether stew was present at this specific meal, but the Passover Seder allowed for additional dishes, and a working-class group would have included what they knew. Now picture the meal beginning. Ritual hand-washing first. Water poured over the hands from a stone vessel. Not pottery, stone, because under Jewish purity law, stone couldn't become ritually unclean. This is why the water jars at the wedding in Cana were stone. They weren't decoration, they were purification vessels. Then, the blessings. The first cup of wine. The cup of sanctification. The host lifts it, speaks the Kiddush prayer, and everyone drinks. The herbs are dipped. The story of the Exodus is told. The youngest at the table asks the 4 questions. The host answers. This liturgy had been repeated for over 1,000 years. The meal proceeds as it has for generations. Familiar, rehearsed, safe. And then Jesus breaks the script. He reaches for the unleavened bread, lifts it. The room quiets. He speaks a blessing. Then he breaks it. The crack of that brittle matzah, sharp, sudden, is the only sound in the room. This is my body, given for you. Do this in remembrance of me. 13 men stare at the broken pieces. They've eaten Passover their entire lives. They've heard the blessing 1,000 times. But no one has ever said this. He sets the bread down, reaches for the cup, the 3rd cup, the cup of redemption. Simple clay, dark wine mixed with water. He lifts it. This cup is the new covenant in my blood, poured out for you. Every man in the room grew up hearing about the covenant. The covenant at Sinai sealed with the blood of bulls splashed against the altar. Moses telling the people, "This is the blood of the covenant." Now Jesus uses the same words. But the blood isn't from an animal, it's his. Tomorrow, they'll understand what he meant. Tonight, they just stare. But before any of this, before the bread, before the cup, Jesus did something that isn't in most paintings and isn't in most communion services. Something that shook the room harder than any words. He stood up from the table. He took off his outer garment. He wrapped a towel around his waist. He poured water into a basin. And he got on his knees, and began to wash their feet. In the ancient world, foot washing was the lowest task in the household. Guests arrived with feet caked in dust, mud, and animal waste from unpaved streets. A servant, the lowest-ranking servant, would wash them, not the host. Never the rabbi, never the master. Peter recoiled. "Lord, are you going to wash my feet?" Jesus answered, "Unless I wash you, you have no part with me." He washed all 24 feet, including the feet of Judas, who he already knew would betray him before the night was over. He knelt before the man who would sell him for 30 pieces of silver. He held his feet. He washed them clean. He dried them with a towel around his waist. Then he sat back down and said, "I have set you an example." The foot washing happened before the bread and wine, before the new covenant, before the body and blood. The first act of the Last Supper wasn't sacred words. It was a man on his knees with a towel, doing the work no one else would do. Then comes the moment that still echoes. Jesus dips a piece of bread into the shared bowl, the charosé perhaps, and hands it directly to Judas. In Jewish meal custom, this was an act of honor. The host would personally dip bread and hand it to a special guest. It was intimacy. It was welcome. It was love made edible. Jesus knew exactly who Judas was and what he was about to do. And he handed him the honored portion. Not accusation, invitation. One last open door, one final chance to choose differently. Judas took the bread. He stood up. He walked to the door. And the Gospel of John records 4 words that carry the weight of the entire night. And it was night. He left the light of that room, the lamps, the bread, the wine, the man who had just washed his feet, and he walked into the dark. Within hours, he would lead soldiers carrying torches back to a garden where Jesus knelt praying alone. Step back now. See the whole room. The cushions pressed flat, the oil lamps guttering low, the broken bread still on the table, the wine cup half empty, the basin of dirty water in the corner, the towel draped over a chair. 12 men remain. 1 has left. And the one who stays at the center of the table knows exactly what's coming. The garden, the arrest, the trials, the scourging, the cross. He could have spent this night anywhere. He could have gone to the temple. He could have preached to crowds. He could have called down legions of angels. Instead, he chose a borrowed room, a simple meal, bread and wine and roasted lamb. He got on his knees and washed dirty feet. He broke cheap bread and called it his body. He lifted a clay cup of watered wine and called it his blood. The most important night in human history didn't happen in a palace or cathedral. It happened around a low table in a small room with 13 men eating the food of the poor. And 2,000 years later, Christians still gather, still break bread, still share wine. The ingredients have changed. Wafers instead of barley flatbread, grape juice instead of diluted wine, silver trays instead of shared bowls. But the act remains. You break it. You share it. You remember. And now, the next time you take communion, picture this room. The cushions on the floor, the smoky lamb, the brittle matzah cracking in his hands, the clay cup, the basin, the towel, the bread extended to the man who would betray him. That's what was actually on the table the night before the cross. Which detail surprised you most? The reclining, the foot washing, the bread to Judas? Tell me in the comments. I read every one. If this changed how you see the Last Supper, hit subscribe. I'll see you in the next one.